Good afternoon. Welcome to Wheeling to Efficiency with Hub and Spoke. If this is the session you signed up for, you're in the right place. I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Mary Boyd, the Vice President of Customer Experience at AvaSure, and very proud to be facilitating today's session with two highly qualified Hub managers. First, Joanne and Mark from Trinity, and I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves and tell a little bit about your background. Joanne, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Musey, and I am the Regional Nurse Manager at the Hub 2 for the Virtual Monitoring Unit for Trinity Health of Trinity Health. The Hub itself is located in Hartford, Connecticut, and I've been here with Trinity for about a year. But I've been a nurse for 32 years, and prior to that, all of my experience is pediatrics. So this has been very different and very new for me, but a challenge nonetheless, which I always have enjoyed. So thank you so much for having me, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. I hope you can learn a lot from Mark and I.
Thanks, Joanne. Mark, would you like to provide a little background?
Yeah, sure. Again, my name is Mark Quirin. I'm the Regional Manager for Virtual Monitoring at Loyola University, which is just outside Chicago area. We have the capacity to monitor up to 240 cameras for 22 different hospitals across Trinity Health. We went live August 6th of 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic, so that was an exciting time for us. I've been a nurse for almost 25 years in a variety of leadership roles, including managing a telemetry department for a while. But again, this is a pretty new experience for me as well.
Joanne, it would be helpful if you gave some similar background about the size of your hub, how many staff you have, how many sites you support, and what number of devices you monitor.
We have a capacity to monitor 248 devices. We monitor patients, I like to say, essentially from the East Coast as far west as Iowa. We monitor 23 ministries across 7 states. And so we obviously we can talk a little bit more about our goals and things like that, where we are with our goals, but that is our capacity. I do have approximately 79 VMAs right now. Within the next 2 weeks, we expect to add 16 more. So we're excited about that because we really are in need of staff. So it will be a big group, and my estimation is that if we reach full capacity in and around 90%, I think we'll need about 125 VMAs.
Wonderful. It's quite a sizable operation. Now, I recognize from talking with you previously that both of you came in after the plan was put in place and maybe construction had started. And so you really joined these programs as you were hiring and getting ready for go live. So would you like to talk to us a little bit about how you prepared for the first day of monitoring patients? Mark, we'll go with you first this time.
Sure. So I came in about 2 weeks before we brought our first hospital up for go live. So obviously right away I was trying to learn as much as I could about the system, what it did, on top of train people how to use a system I've not used before. I can say that the AvaSure staff was extremely helpful in providing some education for us, really giving us some good hands-on with it as well. And then we ended up bringing up a new hospital about every other week, which was good. It was a good cadence for us to continue to hire as we brought up hospitals as well. And we were pretty successful. So I think we brought up all 22 hospitals by mid to the end of January. A couple of delays towards the end, but over just a short period of time, we did bring up 22 different hospitals. So that was it was an exciting time at that point. So I'd say early on, it was all about the hiring, training, get them live, hiring, training, get them live, because we were bringing up these cameras as we go. A lot of lessons learned along the way because processes were pretty much created before I joined in, but there was obviously some tweaking and process improvement along the way. And so we were making sure we had regular meetings with all of our spokes as they came up. It was weekly for a while, then it's been every other week just to make sure everybody stays on board with the changes and the things that are taking place. So very exciting, very busy first year. After January, it really kind of got into managing what we currently have and then promoting camera use across the system to increase our numbers along the way.
Thank you. Joanne?
So I came in where there was a manager hired for this hub. I am hub 2, as I mentioned. Mark's team went live, kind of got up and running about 3 months before we did. Interestingly enough, though, we finished our rollout about at the same time as Mark did. So hub 2, it was really a full court press for hub 2. When I arrived, I came on October 5th, and the manager who was supposed to be here left at the end of that week. So I had 3 days with her to just introduce me to the concept, really, is what I got from that. But I was grateful at least to have had that. And October 12th was the first day that the new staff arrived that I had nothing to do with choosing. So a week later, they showed up, and we weren't going live until November 12th. So we had a month of literally construction was still going on, cameras were being put in, monitor screens, all of the computers, all of that was kind of coming in while this team was with me. So what we did do, though, is we took great advantage of that time, and we created our unit, which included processes like when an admission came, what were we going to do? How were we going to take it from off the facts to the lead? Who's going to admit it? And we did get some guidance from AvaSure, but I'm sure, Mark, you'd probably say the same thing. Each spoke or each hub is different. We had leads in place. Mark, we have some leads who are not VMAs. They're not watching the patients. They're literally operationalizing the unit. So we created we looked at the core values of the organization and tried to work about what is our work, how do we align with the core values, things like that. So we luckily had more time up front than Mark did, but it really was pedal to the metal starting in November. And in all of that time, we did, similar to Mark, many meetings, all virtual meetings with the relevant spokes in the cadence in which we came up and running. And we pulled ours off between November 12th and January 14th, I think it was. So it was very fast for Hub 2. And I know we'll probably talk a little bit later about why it was as fast, but fast isn't always the best. There were great things about it because we jumped right in, but there were definitely things that probably could have been done better had we been given just a little bit more time.
Well, it's impressive. Those were speedy schedules, and you both have substantive hubs. I know that our listeners will be curious as to not only how you got started, but how you've continued to maintain communication with and between the hub and the spokes that you serve. What kind of meeting structure, communication strategies have you deployed? Joanne, you want to take that one first?
Sure. So we started out, we basically needed to identify clinical leaders at each one of the spokes who would help kind of carry it through. I think they called them champs. And I'll speak for my hub and my people. Most all of them are nurses. I don't know if Mark has others, but I have all nurses that I've worked with. And I would say there's opportunities in this realm as to who the people are and how to get them engaged. But that group I have been meeting with we started out for 2 weeks, every 2 weeks, once we all went live. And then we've since changed it to once a month. And we call that our Hub 2 leadership meeting. And that happens on the third Wednesday of the month. I've been fortunate that I have very, very good attendance to mine. And I have some people that are definitely very engaged. Others are a little bit more quiet. But through those interactions, that once a month interaction, that's formalized. But I have very frequent interactions with those leaders outside of that meeting, particularly when we've had a challenge between the spoke and the hub. Also, when there's been occurrence reports, when a patient is on the camera, we talk about opportunities to either have done something different on our end, perhaps communicated on their end. So we have very frequent communication. I have their cell phones on my phone. They have mine. If they need me, they know to call me directly. It's much easier. So I have very frequent off the cuff communications as well.
Great. Mark, do you have a similar structure?
Yeah, very similar structure. We did start early on with, it was about every other week, trying to get the spokes on a meeting. Attendance for me has been a little bit more challenging, and I think the key is the champions that are selected at the hospitals really need to be engaged. And I know some of the people, it was kind of a surprise to them. They're like, oh, here's something else you're going to do. And other people were really engaged. So what I have found is the more vested they are, the more successful the program is for their hospital, for sure. On top of the every other week meetings I was having for, which is now every month, if there's a hospital that had unique challenges or frustrations or whatever it might be, I always offered up a meeting with just me and that hospital leadership, or the people that were put to AvaSure at that hospital. And that I found was really, really helpful to help them understand the perspective, because I think that has been some of our biggest challenges, is just people understanding what the camera system can and can't do. They don't see it. So it's really difficult for them to understand what we're seeing and what we can and can't do. So the more, I think I've got 5 or 6 hospitals that really, I did that weekly meeting with them for a while, and they really rose to the top as far as efficient use of the camera, understanding what we can do, their response times, where it was a true partnership and not just, we're not replacing a sitter, we're a true partner in a healthcare team. The ones that are not engaged, it's a little more challenging, and we're still working towards some improvements there.
Great, thank you. Great advice. In an earlier session, it was about how to obtain your return on investment, and a lot of it started with leadership and accountability for what the goals are. So thank you for mentioning that. So with any change, new standards of work have to be created and updated. How are these new processes created for your monitoring service? Mark?
Okay, so yeah, obviously there's a lot of processes that are created before we even went live, and as we go live, there's some tweaks and changes along the way. The biggest thing I've always put out there is don't let perfection get in the way of progress. So I didn't want to beat myself over making a perfect progress or a perfect process without trying some things along the way, and that seemed to be helpful. Going back to those meetings we had every other week was a very important meeting to discuss, here's some challenges we're having with a few hospitals. Here are some potential solutions. What do you guys think about that? And how are we going to measure for success? So communication is really the key in those process improvements. Because not only are the spokes then hearing our challenges, we're hearing their challenges as well. And again, it is a true partnership. And it's not just what we can do or just what they can do. It is a partnership. And how do we make this program efficient and ultimately better for our patients?
Right.
Joanne, anything to add?
Not a lot. We too did a lot of creation of our own processes. Mark, I know, was very helpful to me, so it's been great having a counterpart. And so Mark and I have exchanged. Sometimes I've been ahead of the curve and created something, and I throw it his way, and vice versa. We've also talked a lot about how our leads work in each of our units. So it really has been helpful to have a partner. But to the point of creating a process, I know that I tell everybody, if you come here expecting everything to be perfect, whether you're a new lead or you're a new VMA, then you're not in the right spot, because we make changes regularly. It doesn't mean we're disorganized. It just means we're trying to do that PDSA cycle, kind of quick and rapid changes to make the best.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears a bit to your staff. What are your strategies for hiring and training the remote video monitoring staff? And specifically, what kind of skill sets do you look for in candidates? Mark?
Yeah, that's been an interesting change over this past year, as I think we're all aware of the market challenges with the workforce and things like that. So when we first started out, we didn't require a clinical background for a lot of the people that we hired. I do find that very valuable when they do have some kind of clinical background or clinical goal. So I did hire a lot of nursing students. I have several nursing schools around the area, nursing students, social work students. I'm trying to tap into the medical assistant programs around here as well. So fortunately, I'm in a pretty populated area where there's a lot of those schools that can help us. Now, there's pros and cons that come with students, but what I have found with most of the people interested in healthcare or have a background in healthcare understand the system better, understand patients and what patients can do better, and understand nursing lingo. And I'll never forget, I remember it was probably one of the first weeks my team lead says, Mark, what does NPO mean? And I'm like, oh, it's nothing by mouth. And he's like, that still doesn't make sense to me. And it was really, I'm the only nurse in the unit. So it was like, oh, wow, yeah, there is some just nursing lingo and medical language that really has to be understood for my team to be successful. And one thing I talk about even when I'm interviewing people is, you're going to learn a lot of new things. And when you're trying to get a report from the nurse and they say, well, they have a new PICC line at left AC, the VMA is like, I don't really know what you're talking about. So a clinical background is helpful. We do provide education when they're here as well on nursing lingo, medical language, things like that. That does help. Right now, the market around us has changed a little bit. So, I mean, you've got to be competitive what the market is for some of these entry-level jobs. And that has become a little bit of a challenge for us along the way. But again, as I tap more and more into schools, I seem to be getting more and more candidates. The challenge being it's hard to get the consistency from them because their school schedules change so much. So that's been my experience so far, and we're still working on some other methods and strategies to improve along the way.
Joanne, what has been your experience in building up your monitoring staff?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've kind of come full circle. So I listened to Mark, and I think that was when I first came here, that was my initial thought was, wouldn't it be great if I could get PCAs, PCTs, MAs? And I had some real failures actually with some of those people who came with that skill set for a host of reasons. So I thought, all right, let's think about the students. I went down the student path, the psychology majors, sociology majors, LPN students. I have had some good luck with LPN students, I will say, although their clinical work is so challenging with the COVID that you have to be ready to bounce and move. Unfortunately, many of the students that I was really excited to get in because I really felt like this was a perfect step in their path, came back and said, I'm actually not going to be able to work when I go back to school. My schedule is this or my schedule is that. So that was a big deflation for me. I felt very deflated. So truthfully, I'm going down another path, and I like where I'm headed. I am headed toward the middle-aged group, perhaps even post-retirees who might need a few extra years of benefits but aren't looking to make $1 million. I have one great success story out there now. I have a gentleman who was a security guard at a local college here for 35 years and not quite old enough to collect and needed some benefits. And he was a little slow to get started. The technical piece was a little challenging, but I just knew he was going to work out. And he's been amazing. And in fact, I actually went up to him today and said, do you have any other colleagues that you would want to come and, could get some wonderful benefits here, maybe not make $1 million, but still get benefits? And he said, I think I might. And I think that's the path I'm going to head down. I think the middle-aged people have been proven to be very reliable coming to work too. And that's been a big challenge for us at our hub. So I'm going to travel down a different road and see where I land there. So.
Well, those are both some creative recruitment strategies, and I think an additional challenge after they're hired is training, developing, engaging them, and retaining that staff. Any creative strategies that have worked or that you would recommend?
We got some help, certainly got some help from the educators from AvaSure, who were really great. And then because we were headed into COVID, we initially had them on site and we went to the train the trainer mode, which I think Mark went to as well. And I pulled a couple of my leads at that time to do the train the trainer, and they loved it because it was personal growth for them, right? They learned how to be in front of a group and teach and show their expertise. So that was wonderful. But we really created our own orientation process, and each orientation we realized we have to review this in orientation. We missed this because what became evident was how much about a hospital setting many of these people didn't know, having not worked in a hospital. A 24/7 operation functions very differently. So we needed to make sure we were covering certain things both in the interview and in the training. Retention has been a huge challenge. I'll be honest. There are a lot. It is an entry-level job. Many of the people who've come to work here do not have a lot of personal resources to assist them to assure they can get to work. So those are some challenges. We've offered some very specific resources here from St. Francis Hospital, which is where we're located in Hartford, that have been incredibly helpful to several people who, unknowingly to me, had been in domestic violence situations, homeless, and challenged with food and insecurities. And we've been able to provide them the assistance to really keep them on their feet. And those people, in their gratitude, they have stayed. Many of them have stayed, and it's been very rewarding for me to assist in those ways. But we're looking at some different things. I don't know if retention bonuses are anything we can do in this market, but we're looking at stay interviews as opportunities to stay on top of people and at least have an idea if they're going to be leaving, so we aren't caught off guard. But it has been a challenge.
Mark, anything you'd like to add on rewards and recognition to retain staff?
Yeah, I think that the key that's been for some of our staff that have stayed, and we have a lot that have stayed since the beginning, is keep them involved in the process improvement. I think if they feel like they have value and they're doing worthwhile work and can be involved in some of the change, it really does help because they get to see their ideas come to fruition. Obviously, students are hard because they graduate and move on to something different. The other thing I always am open to is, again, I think as Joanne said, we have a lot of entry-level employees. But if they're looking to do some promotions within the organization, I would much rather them leave me and go and stay in the organization than leave and go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So I think the word is out that, hey, if they feel like they're qualified for other positions in the system now, they know that I'm a key person that can help with their moving along the system. And then it's more timed. It's not a last minute thing. I can usually work through some things like that. But I think as they're telling their friends, there is opportunity for growth in the system as well. And I think that keeps them here and it keeps them good. Even though it might not be retention for my department specifically, it's retention for the organization, which is good as well.
Great. Okay. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We mentioned earlier about meeting program and system goals and objectives, and data can play an important role when making decisions. What data are you utilizing to make decisions within the hub and with your spokes?
Mark, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, I can say the piece of data that I use the most all comes right from the AvaSure dashboard. You can export into an Excel spreadsheet and it does all that for us. When it comes down to the simple things like the investigation of an event, we can give a perspective that the hospital might not have understood. And I've always tried to explain that we have a video feed on the patient. The nurse walking by the room has a snapshot of what's going on. So sometimes they don't always hear or see or understand what the patient has been doing leading up to that snapshot. The dashboard is great because it tells everything we've done leading up to that snapshot that they see. How long it takes to respond to alarms and things like that. So investigations in using the dashboard is huge. It also helps me understand and evaluate performance for my own staff. So I can tell just from the dashboard how engaged some of my staff are just by how many verbal interventions they use versus just staff alarms. Or, if they're not touching anything on the screen and we get a "Are you there?" message that pops up, it's observer responsiveness. So it should take about 2 or 3 seconds to turn that message off just to make sure you're paying attention. If I start seeing that somebody is having 10, 15, 20 seconds to respond to that, something's telling me they're not paying attention, they're maybe drifting off or something like that. So right away, we can jump on that, get that person a mental break, take a walk, get your blood flowing, come back, and let's get started again refreshed. So those are probably the 2 biggest pieces of data I can use. There's a lot of other things that the system helps us put together with the Orna dashboard, and that talks about stat alarm response times, things like that. And that helps the spokes understand their performance level as well. We know the data is out there that under 19 seconds is significant increase for risk for falls. And when they see their average is 18, that's great, but that means that's an average. There's a lot that are much shorter, but a lot that are quite a bit longer. And we can share that data and say, yeah, of your, let's just say 300 responses, you had 30 that were much longer than 19 seconds, and some that are going up to 2 and 3, 4 minutes. And then they can address those situations with their staff as well. So there's a lot of good data out there to help, evaluate the program, evaluate staff.
Great. Joanne, anything you'd like to add about data?
Sure. Some of the things that we are monitoring, and we're trying to kind of keep here in the hub, like what are our metrics? But we're looking also at the percentage of camera usage. So if I have 23 ministries, I look at how many ministries are using at least one camera. So Hub 2 has a subset of ministries that have never used the cameras before, and then a large subset that has used the cameras. So we have real discrepancies in the newer hospitals using 1, 2, 3 cameras. Those hospitals that have used cameras in the past are using 15, 16, and 17. What I want to do is try and see how many hospitals are at least getting an opportunity to use the cameras. The goals have been set by Trinity for us. By 90 days out, once everyone's up and running 3 months, the goals at Trinity have been that 60% of the cameras were being monitored. So 60% at both of our hubs is in and around 145 patients. We have not reached that. We haven't reached it for a host of reasons, but even when our staffing was better than it currently is, we really hovered right around 100, 105. So those are some goals we're monitoring as well, and some data we're monitoring. We're also monitoring, why are patients being put on the cameras? So AvaSure helps us get that data as well. For the most part, the majority of patients who are put on the cameras are placed on cameras for falls. But more recently for us, we have had a significant uptick in patients put on the cameras for medical device interference. Confused patients who might be pulling at lines, they're down to the last vein on this elderly patient who's dehydrated and all, and please, we can't lose that IV. So we've done a lot of work on the medical device interference, and we have all of that data to support, historically, are all of the AvaSure customers, so to speak, using, and then what are we using it for? So there's a lot of data that AvaSure offers us to be able to tell how well we're doing, where we can make improvements. And when you have someone like Mark and I have in Ginger, who's our leader, she's amazing with data and knows how to get into the nitty gritty and think about things that haven't even crossed my mind. So we're really grateful to have her as well.
Great. Have you had changes in the number of devices that are placed at each hospital, or how are those decisions made about how many telesitters will be used at each spoke hospital?
Yeah, I can speak that a little bit. Go ahead, Joanne.
No, go right ahead, please. Right. It's the same answer.
So yeah, interestingly enough, early on, we did have some hospitals that were getting way above their 60%. They were running out of cameras at some point. And we did establish as an organization, after we're live and implemented, and we've given every hospital a chance to get up to their 60% usage, we evaluate when a hospital should be taking cameras from one location to another. There's a whole financial piece that comes with that. We can't just add cameras, but we have to move them around. And we do have a lot of hospitals that aren't quite up to 60% and never have even been close. And others that are up at 60, 65, 70%, sometimes running out and want more cameras. So there is a process in place of evaluating use of cameras. But one thing the hospitals that use a lot of cameras have not drastically improved on is inefficient use of cameras. And I say that in terms of we do have a hospital who uses a lot of cameras, but they use them on things like where it's an enclosed bed that we can barely even see in because it's a mesh covering around the bed. And it's like, well, wait a second, why are we watching this thing that we can't even see and you want more cameras? It's a better method for keeping an eye on that patient and then using the camera elsewhere. The great reason we can use it for someone bed is to help them get out of the bed. But if we're just going to watch people that aren't doing anything, is that value added? Instead of bringing more financial, responsibility to your organization, let's look at the efficiency of use. So that's the next piece of it is, yes, you're using all your cameras, and also are you as efficient as you could be in those cameras? And then we start looking at the organizations or the hospitals that aren't using them. And if we can't create an action plan that's effective for them, then those cameras can transfer over.
Actually, I would like to interject and just say,
Mhm.
my
Yes.
understanding when I came here, I specifically said, how was it decided, how many cameras an organization got? And someone said they started out with a little bit random. Those that had cameras, they knew what they were using. So I think they used those as starting those organizations. But those organizations didn't have cameras to start with. They basically looked at and afforded 5% of the staffed beds. So, you can do the math, and obviously the larger organizations have many, many more cameras than the smaller organizations, but it was 5% of staffed beds, and that's how camera numbers for each spoke were decided upon.
I know one question our participants may be wondering is what is the monitoring tech to patient ratio? How many patients do they monitor at once?
Yeah. The AvaSure tells us that pretty much the gold standard is 10 to 12. I kind of call that our sweet spot because I think people are best able to manage that many patients. But the cameras themselves, the screens, are afforded to go up to 16 patients. I would not advise that on a regular basis. We have had to stretch ourselves occasionally. That's quite a feat. That's a lot to monitor and be efficient with. So I would say, personally, I think the sweet spot is in and around 10 to 12.
Same for you, Mark.
Yep.
Okay. One thing we talked a lot about how you, as hub leaders, interact with the spokes that you serve, but didn't really talk a lot about the Trinity system oversight. What kind of communication is there with, say, Ginger, your program lead that you mentioned from Trinity Health, or what kind of accountabilities are set in place at the system level?
So
Mark?
we do meet with Ginger weekly, just kind of evaluate some data, some things that she's hearing as well. We have a Trinity steering committee, which is members from a variety of the hospitals to help us look at process improvement, look at the data, things like that. And I think that's pretty imperative, is to get that system oversight that understands the bigger picture versus just the hospital piece as well.
Right. Recently, we added, or we're looking to add, a couple of CNOs to that steering committee. Right now, I think there's one or two that attend, but particularly, I think the recommendation to me is it's that old influencer model, is when you have people that maybe are not as sold on the process. Those are the people to bring to your steering committee to help them better understand, help them feel part of decision making, and to get them engaged in the process. So I think it is a critical piece, to be sure that they're included in that, should you do a steering committee as well.
Okay, a few more questions because we want to get to some of the things that are coming through in the Q&A and chat forums. But clearly, you've learned a lot over the months that you've brought these hubs live, and you've had many different experiences. I'd like to give each of you a chance to offer some lessons learned that you'd like to share with the audience. Mark?
Yeah, I guess the big thing is never undervalue the importance of your relationship with the spokes. That will make or break the program for that hospital and for the hub. The better relationships you have, the better off you're going to be. It's just easier to work through challenges. And you can get blamed for a lot when you're behind a camera. And to be able to have a relationship with that hospital makes a difference to work through some of those challenges. There's always something that both the hub and the spoke can learn from those relationships.
Okay, Joanne?
Yeah, I would echo what Mark says, but I think if I gave an example, to just give another example, I think that creating the team at the hub is a critical part to the success of the hub. And whether this is an entry-level job at your organization or you choose to make it a few steps up, either way, people need to feel valued, and they need to feel like what they have to say, they're the ones doing the work, matters. And I can tell you, I've had a significant change in my team since some crazy little idea of a suggestion box that someone built and decorated and put at the front of the unit. And the suggestion cards were created, and they routinely give me suggestions and thoughts. I respond to every single one. We put them on the board so they see and feel valued and that they're heard. It doesn't mean everything they ask for can be done, but at least they know I'm seeing it, I value it, and I'm trying to make things happen. So that's been a big thing that I'm grateful that we've implemented, and it really works well here.
So it's clear you're both focused on relationships, both with your staff and those that you serve, and those are definitely keys to success. So we'd also like to have you share some of the good catches that have happened in the hospitals that you served as a result of your service. This is a program focused on safety and reduction of self-harm and other use cases. So anything you'd like to share? Joanne, I'll let you go first this time.
Sure. I was thinking very specifically about one of my middle-aged VMAs, and Sandra, and what a gem she is. Really a wonderful, wonderful woman. And she was monitoring a patient, a young gentleman, about, I'd say 35, who was in his bed and not really doing a heck of a lot. But she looked at him, and we have a process. I think he had oxygen in, he had a nasal cannula in. And one of our processes is that hour on the hour, you zoom in to make sure the cannula is where it needs to be and it hasn't slipped out of their nose, and then you zoom out with the patient. So she zoomed into the patient, and she just said, and she's not a clinical person at all, but she said, Joanne, I'm a mother, and I just knew something wasn't right with that patient. And sure enough, she called the nurse, and the nurse came in, and the patient was literally, the patient ended up in a full arrest. It was a full code. The patient was not on a monitor, so nothing would have alarmed. The patient was a full code. It was very upsetting to Sandra. And I would say not to underestimate the number of times that will happen in a hub and how it can affect your staff, just as a little sidebar there. But this young man was a full code. He lived, which we fully did not expect him to live, because it was very significant event. And he was transferred to the ICU. And the next day she came to me and she knocked on my door and she said, "Joanne, he's alive. He lived." And it was like she felt like she played a part in that. And she certainly did. Without her, I don't know that young man would have lived. We never found out what it was, nor did we expect to. But I think that she, since then, and she's been with us since, she has felt like a very valued member, and that the work she does is important. So she's my great example.
Thank you for sharing. Mark, a
Two
good
quick
catch
stories.
story.
Yeah, two quick stories. One is we did have, this is probably about a month ago now, but a nurse walked into a room, and we were actually watching the roommate, and she walked in the room, and the patient in the other bed, young, pretty big guy, jumped out of bed. He was actually going through a detox or something along those lines, and cornered the nurse in the room. And we were able to hit that stat alarm and call help into the room to prevent her from getting injured, because you hear about those stories all the time. So that was a great story, a great pickup on not even the patient we're watching. And I think you bring up safety. It's not always safety for the patients we're actually watching. It's safety for everybody.
Yeah.
One of my favorite stories I still tell is you can get out of this program what you put into it as well. We had one of my night VMAs who was watching our 12 patients, and one was really, really anxious, where he was calling the nurses in every 5 minutes. I need this, I need this, I need this. And he just could not relax, and he was driving the nurses nuts. So my VMA just started talking to him. How's it going? Where are you from? Just starting to have casual conversation, keeping him calm. And she spoke to him all night long, keeping him engaged, where it really allowed the nurses to provide care to their other patients, because they weren't always in that room. And they happened to be here at the local hospital here at Loyola. They were so thankful for her help in keeping his anxiety down that they walked over to the hub, and we're a good 10 minutes away from the main hospital, to personally thank her. So, he wasn't necessarily at risk of hurting himself from what we were watching, as much as he was just occupying so much of the nurse's time. And you hear those stories all the time. So her ability to kind of, keep him calm really helped a lot.
I see that we're getting close to time. I have a couple of questions. One is, do you have responsibilities beyond telesitter monitoring? Or is yours a hub, a one service line focus?
Yeah, we are one service line focused. So this is my primary role. As Joanne mentioned, when we're at full capacity, we're going to have over 100 people working here. That's a lot to manage. I can tell you, and Joanne probably knows a little more about this one, but some of the hospitals that we have taken over the monitoring for them, they often had a manager that was their second duty. And they have told me they never have the opportunity to really engage with that staff there or really look at their performance. So I think it's been a benefit the way we have it set up here right now.
Great.
Yeah.
Did you create a specific job description for your virtual monitoring attendants?
There is a specific job description that was created here at Trinity. I would imagine, Mark, we're sharing the same one. I doubt it's any different. So yes, there is a specific job description. Yes.
And at the present time, are you using telesitters in any non-acute care units, or are they all in the acute care hospital setting?
Mine are all the acute care. That we do have some rehab floors within the hospitals where we do monitor patients, but other than that, it's all acute care.
Yeah, we're the same. We have like a couple of, they call them transitional care. So they're on the way, not quite acute care, but not quite rehab, but they're in the physical hospital.
Yeah. To the individual who answered that, your AvaSure contacts can help you with some of the other type care settings that we are supporting. This is a great question. How do you handle fatigue with staff monitoring screens full-time during a shift?
Yeah, I can say the frequent breaks is very important. Now, there's a couple things my staff did. They brought in some of those big, huge exercise balls to replace their chairs so people can kind of stay, active and engaged. They brought in like a little cycle machine they can use their legs on to keep the blood flowing. The biggest piece for us is the frequency of breaks. It's not just your lunch and your one break. It's the frequent, hey, I just need 5 minutes to step out, get my mind off of what I'm doing so I can come back. The rounding of my team leads, looking at staff. So if they come by somebody and they look like they're starting to fade a little bit, it's like, get up, take a walk, move around. It is hard. I manage a remote telemetry unit. They can just listen. Here, you really have to focus on the screen with your eyes. You have to pay attention. And
Yes.
So you do need those more frequent breaks, maybe shorter breaks, more frequent, but it just gets you up and moving around.
Right. Yeah, I would say the same thing, but I do think fatigue is a big issue. Many people who work in my unit, this is a second job, whether they do 2 full-time jobs because they do 312s, or they do 24 hours here plus 40 hours somewhere else. But, in these entry-level jobs, people need to work 2 jobs to make it with families and things like that. So I often feel like some of them try to burn the candle at both ends. But we do the same thing. I would say this though, unlike on a nursing unit, like where your nurses have 4 or 5, whatever, 6 patients that they have, probably more these days. The person who breaks the VMAs is not an optional staff person. That's like as critical as a VMA is, because these people cannot leave their station and they are not good to anybody for 12 hours if they can't get up and move around, go for a break, take a lunch. And so while, technically many policies will say you don't have to afford 2 breaks a day, I say for me, I feel like that's mandatory. We have to figure out a way to make sure they're getting away from that camera at least 3 times a day in a 12-hour shift.
Great, thank you. Just 2 more quick questions. Have you used one monitor to watch 2 patients in a double room?
No, it's not a great idea. Yeah, and that's the only weird thing we've done is we were asked to monitor a COVID vaccination, post-vaccination room if anybody passed out. That was the only thing, and we offered that. It was a staffing challenge for the hospital. We did that for them. But it messes with your data. Staff don't know who you're talking about sometimes. It's not a good idea.
Okay. And then final question, what subject material or content do you include in your recurring meetings, oversight meetings with Hub and Spoke or with the system office?
Well, for me, I address staffing issues every month, so they know where we are, what we're expecting to come in. So that is recurrent. We also talk about camera utilization at each one of our meetings, just to kind of give them an idea where they are. And I will present some data to show them the staff response time so that they can see where they land. And each month it might be something a little different that we try to highlight as far as data. We've had some at Hub 2, we had some prolonged technical things that we were working on, but we were keeping them very informed and working through that. But I wanted them to know some of what we were spending some of our time on. But that's for me. I don't know, Mark, if you have anything else.
Yeah, to add to that, I've actually had a few more asks of the units that use the most hours of the camera. We can pull that data because the hospital falls teams are starting to look at, oh, this unit has the least amount of falls. How is that in relation to how many hours of AvaSure cameras they're using, and trying to correlate that? And I think it's been a great ask, and I think that's something I'm going to start sharing on a regular basis. And I think you can easily get the top 25 usage pieces of data. And then drilling that down a little bit is really helpful to see the correlation between decrease in falls and increase in camera usage.
Well, Mark and Joanne, I want to thank you. As expected, we're running out of time. So really appreciate the wealth of knowledge you've shared with our participants today. And for everyone participating, we encourage you to return back to the program. Our next session is a very popular one, Tips and Tricks from Monitor Staff Pros. So this is a panel discussion not to be missed. But Mark and Joanne, thank you for your time, and thank you for all that you're doing to keep people safe.
Thank you,
Mary. Thank you, everybody. Good luck.
Bye-bye.